movements of this type since 1965. So we're talking 60 years since something like this has happened in Australia. So thanks everyone for the effort for getting here. My speech today is very much a foundational speech, just to set some history and some background.
My mum said it needs to be busted in the white place.
And then also talk about what was called the National Catholic Rural Movement, which started in the late 30s and 40s and went into the 50s and 60s. And so we can just kind of understand what occurred before us and the pattern that we're kind of picking up here. We will turn back the clock until noontime is endless time again. This is a quote from Flee to the Fields, which is a collection of essays and papers that lays the foundations for the Catholic land movement. The movement was led by a fiery Irish Dominican priest, Father Vincent McNabb, who was the de facto chaplain for the Catholic land movement and distributism more broadly. In pre-industrial agrarian societies, noon was a natural break for midday prayer. It promoted a rhythm of labour that was balanced with the spiritual life. Today, I want to take you through a brief history of the Catholic land movement, a fascinating movement that started in the 1920s and 30s, aimed at reviving rural life, promoting self-sufficiency in response to industrialisation's effects, in particular, its hollowing out of traditional ways of living by encouraging a return to agrarian, faith-based living. The Catholic land movement began in the United Kingdom, particularly in England, as a reaction to the profound changes brought by the Industrial Revolution. This period saw rapid urbanisation, families leaving rural areas for cities. They faced poverty, exploitation, poor working and living conditions, and a disconnection from the rhythms of nature and their lives as Catholics. Inspired by Pope Leo XIII's 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, Catholic intellectuals sought to counter these challenges. The encyclical criticised both unrestrained capitalism and socialism and advocated for a system where property ownership and family life could thrive, a concept which would become known as distributism. This was advocated for by figures such as G.K. Chesterton, Hilaire Belloc, and of course, Father Vincent McNabb. The encyclical also called on Catholics to form associations amongst themselves and unite their forces. Father Vincent McNabb became a cornerstone of the movement with his writings, such as his book, The Church and the Land, published in 1926. McNabb became a vocal critic of urban life, with its dependence on industrial systems, husbands and fathers removed from their homes to work, cramped living conditions, etc. All of these things leading to both spiritual and material impoverishment amongst Catholics and the population generally. He believed Catholics should not only return to, but reclaim the land, embrace agrarian living as a path to self-sufficiency, communal alliance, and most importantly, holiness. He wrote, "Life on the land, the raising of large families, the possession of real wealth over artificial tokens, concern for the needs of men, not those of machines. These were the trademarks of a sane, well-ordered, well-adjusted society. This rural ideal would restore natural daily rhythms, including pauses such as those for the Angelus at noon, which industrial work schedules had not just disrupted, but abolished." The movement wasn't just about farming for the sake of farming though. It was a restorative movement which sought to reconnect God's creation with Catholic families and communities more broadly, in line with Rerum Novarum, and on the back of Pope Pius XI's encyclical Quadragesimo Anno in 1931, which called for the principles of subsidiarity, and particularly issues being addressed at the smallest scale possible. McNab called for these things to be embraced. Alongside lay Catholics, he went on to found the Catholic Land Association. These groups often directly tied to parishes. They created demonstration farms to teach practical skills while helping and assisting urban Catholics to resettle in rural areas with the skills, techniques and tools to support themselves. At its peak, it's estimated to have led up to 1,000 direct participants, which were primarily of the working class. They published a periodical called The Cross and the Plough, which disseminated news, ideas, advice and spiritual reflections, and it had a circulation of approximately 2,000 to 3,000 copies per edition. At its peak, the movement supported numerous land associations, training farms across the UK. The movement drew heavily on Catholic social teaching. It emphasised that work should serve the family, the common good, and not merely be for the purposes of profit. However, the Catholic land movement faced significant difficulties. The economic turbulence of the interwar years, World War II, the death of Chesterton in 1936, and then its de facto chaplain, Father Vincent McNab, in 1943. It hamstrung the movement and it led to its decline. Families began to prioritise survival over agrarian ideals, and by the mid-20th century, the movement had faded from existence and went dormant, except for Australia. In the late 1930s, the National Catholic Rural Movement began to emerge out of the intellectual milieu of the Campion Society, formalising itself in 1941. The Campion Society was a group of idealistic Catholics that formed out of the encyclicals Rerum Novarum, Quadragesimo Anno, and the Vatican's call under the banner of Catholic Action that called for the formation of lay apostolates to engage and influence society. This was a group of undergraduates from Melbourne, which included the notorious B.A. Bob Santamaria. He went on to become the secretary of the National Catholic Rural Movement. The NCRM wanted to apply Catholic principles to social and economic challenges, counter the combined threats of communism and unbridled capitalism by promoting a decentralised agrarian society based on small-scale family farming and rural communities, the principles of distributism and subsidiarity central. The NCRM's vision did not rely solely on the writings and teachings of the UK and European Catholic land movement though. American agrarianism, such as the Southern Agrarians, the National Catholic Welfare Conference, and Roosevelt's New Deal, with its focus on government intervention and rural reform, were drawn upon to develop a model for the Campion Society's vision of a new agrarian culture in Australia. In his book in 1945, The Earth, Our Mother, Santamaria argued for a re-ruralisation of Australia. He proposed policies to support small farmers, such as reducing rural debt, cooperative finance, land conservation, land resettlements, and rural education initiatives. These would go on to become key objectives of the National Catholic Rural Movement. The movement organised conferences, it published materials, it engaged with Catholic communities to promote its vision. It had an office in Swanston Street in Melbourne. And from what I understand, and in fact I'll talk a bit more later on, I've come across some more information actually just very recently, it was very, very well supported and funded by Bishop Mannix out of Melbourne. It sought to influence policy, in particular within the Australian Labor Party, where Santamaria wielded significant influence through a parallel anti-communist organisation called the Catholic Social Studies Movement that was also founded at the same time. So Santamaria was, juggling these two hats. The movement's rural vision faced significant obstacles though. Broader economic and social trends such as urbanisation, high interest rates for farming, at that time it was 15+%, declining agricultural holdings. It undermined NCRM's push for a decentralised agrarian society. Market pressures made small-scale farming less feasible, It undermined the ideal of widespread ownership. Landowners, agricultural businesses, policymakers had little motivation or interest to support land redistribution and cooperative farming. These posed a threat to the existing beneficial economic structures in place. An example of this was a rural reconstruction committee run at the federal level, and the NCRM made a submission to it, and the chair of the committee essentially threw it out because it went against everything that they were promoting, which was a free market agenda. Additionally, Australia's population at the time was largely dominated by Protestantism, and secularism was increasing. The ideals and vision of the National Catholic Rural Movement had little appeal outside of Catholic networks, and even within Catholic networks, it was still difficult. Santa Maria, being a city boy himself, he lacked the rural experience, and it led critics to dismiss him and the movement as romantic and impractical. However, there were several attempts to establish rural settlements in Australia. Some got off the ground. Some people might be familiar with Maryknoll down in Victoria, and San Isidore, just outside of Wagga in New South Wales. Santa Maria and NCRM, they were in discussions with local and state government authorities, and these discussions also included bishops. There was NCRM chapters in Swan Hill, Toowoomba and Bunbury, WA. So I'm just, it was quite big, spread throughout the country. One notable NCRM proposal in 1953 involved the use of Crown land in Tasmania and Victoria to settle Italian immigrants using foreign capital. So they had actually got an Italian bank on board to fund the purchase of large blocks of land to subdivide this up for families to then move into. It was a plan which ignited controversy. The Tasmanian scheme failed due to economic impracticalities, including insufficient farm sizes. So the government had run feasibilities on what they thought was required for these farms to be able to, for people to be able to sustain themselves, whereas the National Catholic Rural Movement had their own ideals of, Chesterton talks about 3 acres and a cow. They were like, no, we don't want any more than like 10 to 12 cows, and the government was like, no, you need to have 30 cows to be able to make this work. So they came to, there was a loggerheads here. There was also concerns about creating low living standards and migrant enclaves. Public and government fears of racial blocks, political complications combined with financial constraints doomed the project. Critics accused Santa Maria of promoting a peasant society and abusing his influence within the ALP and using the NCRM as a political voter stack to win areas, to win seats. With the well-known ALP-DLP split, the NCRM became a secondary focus, losing momentum and its influence diminished. Santa Maria and others in the Campion Society redirected their efforts towards a broader political and media activities such as the National Civic Council. At its peak, the NCRM had, in 1950, had 300 rural groups before disbanding in 1966 due to its membership dwindling and the burden that these groups were placing on rural priests. I'm just going to pause here too about a story that I heard during the week that I only just found out about. So, and it's to do with why the movement, lost momentum. So Santa Maria at the time was basically using, he was using the NCRM in a way to help with his political activities as well through the Labor Party, and he was getting, they were getting quite antagonistic, and obviously they had the ALP-DLP split. Mannix was fully supporting him, Archbishop Mannix. Cardinal Gilroy in Sydney, the Sydney Archdiocese was very tight and close with the Labor Party at that time. And so these movements through the Campion Society were being funded under the guise of Catholic Action, which was a call by the Vatican for the lay apostolates. And so Gilroy, because of the antagonism that was going on, and he was causing problems, Gilroy wrote to the Vatican to seek clarity on whether the activities these people were engaged in were meeting the objectives of Catholic action. And the Vatican wrote back and said, no, they're not. And so Mannix could no longer fund Santa Maria. And so it's a big, there's a big piece of, so you see some like internal conflict there. Sydney, Melbourne kind of diocese, internal conflict. I'm not particularly sure of Gilroy's background. I believe he was an Australian, but there might be, potentially might be a bit of like British, English, Irish antagonism going at each other there as well. So it's a bit of an interesting piece of history there. So with the National Catholic Rural Movement finishing in 1966, I'd like to say that the story doesn't end there. In recent years, the Catholic land movement has experienced an extraordinary revival, particularly in the United States and now here in Australia. We are the first conference to have occurred outside of America. Young Catholic families, disheartened with the modern world, have revitalised and re-embraced the movement's vision. The ideals that drove McNabb and his contemporaries now inspire those to seek a humbler, more integrated life where faith, family and farming are lived in harmony. Since around 2020, the leaders, Michael Guidice, now anyone who might have Twitter or X, he's on there, his name is Michael Thomas of Sharon. He's got a huge following, so you could go and look him up. Very wholesome content. And Andrew Ewell reinvigorated the movement, organising conferences, workshops and local chapters in the US. The CLM's 4 pillars are support for agricultural productive Catholic households, teaching and training of the laity in agricultural skills and traditions, the encouragement of fellowship, fostering of networks of practical and spiritual support, and of course, ultimately the glorification of God. Today, the Catholic Land Movement boasts 40 plus chapters across the US, with interest growing globally. In December 2024, the American-based leaders presented their mission at the Vatican, and they met Pope Francis, seeking to renew an apostolic blessing given to Catholic rural initiatives by Pope Pius XII in 1946. The question is, where to here for Australia? There is a resurgence amongst a lot of Catholics to live intentionally, rooted in their faith and creation, and counter the hostilities of the modern world. I guess in my view, we're not calling for a new NCRM. We're not calling for some type of political activist movement here. Personally, I'm not interested in doing that. But it is a case of, yes, that these things will come and go, these movements will rise and fall, great men will live and die, but the overarching and fundamental truths of the Catholic land movement are perennial. Those being, 1, the fundamental right to private property. Private ownership of productive land is a natural right derived from God's creation and enshrined in Catholic doctrine. Subsidiarity. Society builds from the family up, the family being the first society. And that higher powers, such as the state and corporations, cannot usurp this. The family as the domestic church and the seedbed of virtue. Large families thrive on land they own, where children learn faith, work ethic, mutual assistance through the daily rhythms tied to the seasons and the liturgy of the land. Distributism and widespread ownership of for the common good. Economic justice necessitates distributing productive assets widely, not consolidating them in the hands of a few. And finally, stewardship and creation and the dignity of labour. Humans are called to till and keep the earth, as it says in Genesis. Farming in many ways is a sacred act. It reconnects us to God's order. It reveals essential truths about life and death, work, struggle, pain, agony, joy, time and eternity, and of course God. In closing, I'm going to quote Reverend Navarum here. And as I understand it, this is a quote which Father Vince McNabb relied upon, and it's as pertinent now and relatable now to our times as it was back then. And he relied upon this quote to form the Catholic Land Associations. There is a good deal of evidence in favour of the opinion that many of these societies are in the hands of secret leaders and are managed on principles ill according with Christianity and the public well-being, and that they do their utmost to get within their grasp the whole field of labour, and force working men either to join them or to starve. Under these circumstances, Christian working men must do one of two things: either join associations in which their religion will be exposed to peril, or form associations amongst themselves and unite their forces so as to shake off courageously the yoke of so unrighteous and intolerable an oppression. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. I was going to do questions. One of the lessons learned out of America was questions being done around the fire at night. I'm happy to answer some questions, but I know people are itching to get into the butchering. I don't know, what's the time?
11:17.
Mr. Slee, you keen to go?
Whenever you like.
Right. Is that, I'll answer like a couple of questions if anyone's got any, and then we can we'll get into the butchering. Beautiful, no questions. Love it. Must have been a great speech. Righto, we will, Mr. Slee and I will go and sort ourselves out, and we'll get ready for the sheep. Kids just over at the yards, right? Sheep are a skittish animal. We don't need kids running wild over there because the sheep will go silly, right? So just be a little bit sensible over there. Thank you. Father's coming.